Glimmer of Hope. The group moved swiftly, their footsteps soft against the grass as they ventured deeper into the wilderness. The thick trees and underbrush provided some cover, but the sense of loss weighed heavily on Jaden's heart. Elijah had bought them precious time, but at a steep price. Sarah, her baby still in her arms, kept her head down, her eyes focused ahead. The others remained silent, each of them lost in their thoughts. Jaden could hear the distant sound of sirens and drones as they continued their patrols over the city. He knew they couldn't afford to stop for long, but they needed rest, food, water, and supplies if they were going to survive the journey ahead. Pastor Caleb, who had been leading the group, turned to him. "We should keep moving until we find shelter. The longer we stay in one place, the more likely they are to catch up." Jaden nodded, his mind reeling. Where would they go? The roads were monitored. The cities were crawling with GSF patrols. "I heard there's a place," Sarah said quietly, her voice shaky. "A commune up north. A group of believers who have been helping those who are marked or unmarked." Jaden met her gaze, his eyebrows furrowed. "Do you know where it is?" She nodded. "I don't have exact coordinates, but I know the general direction. It's hidden, off the grid. If we can make it through the hills, we might have a chance." Pastor Caleb glanced at Jaden. "We'll follow her lead. Every step we take is one closer to safety." And so, the journey north began. The forest stretched endlessly ahead, an unfamiliar world far from the prying eyes of the government. The night was cold, but the air felt purer here, almost like they were being shielded from the darkness of the world behind them. They moved for hours, crossing rivers and climbing hills, taking short breaks when necessary. The baby, though fussy, had finally fallen asleep in Sarah's arms. Jaden looked up at the stars, the vastness of the sky filling him with a strange sense of peace. The world seemed so big, and yet, in this moment, it felt like only a few souls remained awake, those still resisting the tide of oppression. As they reached the crest of a hill, they paused for a moment to rest. It was then that Jaden heard something, a low rumble in the distance, almost like thunder. But it wasn't. It was something much more sinister. The sound grew louder. Engines. Jaden's heart raced. "Get down!" They ducked behind a cluster of trees as a convoy of GSF military trucks rumbled into view, their headlights cutting through the night. Pastor Caleb whispered urgently, "They're still searching for us." Jaden's eyes narrowed. They couldn't be far behind, but he wasn't about to let them catch up. "We have to go off the trail," he said. "If we stay on this path, they'll track us. There's a small ravine to the east. If we make it there, we'll be out of sight." "Lead the way," Pastor Caleb said, his voice steady. With the convoy getting closer, they moved quickly and quietly, slipping off the main trail and heading for the ravine. As they crept down the slope, Jaden's thoughts raced. How long would they be able to keep running? How many more sacrifices would it take before they reached true safety? But in the darkness, something unexpected happened. At the very edge of the ravine, they spotted a figure, a man, standing alone in the shadows. His clothes were tattered, his face hidden beneath a hood. But there was something about him, a quiet authority, that made Jaden stop. "Who are you?" Jaden asked, his voice low. The man stepped forward, revealing a faint, glowing symbol on his wrist. It was the same symbol Jaden had seen in old prophecies, the one that had marked those who had stood against the system in the final days. "We are the resistance," the man said, his voice like a whisper against the wind. and you've made it just in time. Chapter 11. The Resistance. The man before them stepped out of the shadows, revealing his weathered face. His eyes were sharp, and there was an air of quiet wisdom about him. His clothes, though tattered, were marked with the same faint, glowing symbol that Jaden had seen only in the scriptures, the symbol of the faithful remnant. Jaden hesitated, unsure whether to trust this stranger. But there was something in the man's presence, something familiar and safe, that urged him to take the chance. "You're with the resistance?" Jaden asked, his voice cautious. The man nodded, his expression somber. "We've been watching. You're not the first to come seeking refuge. But you've made it this far. Others haven't." Sarah, still holding her baby close, stepped forward. "How can we trust you? How do we know you're not just another part of the system?" The man's lips curled into a small smile, but it was a sad smile. "I know what they've told you about the resistance, that we're terrorists, that we're the ones fighting against progress. But the truth is much darker." Jaden felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. "What do you mean?" The man's eyes hardened. "The world has already been remade. You've seen the signs, the mark, the surveillance, the false peace they promise. But there's something much worse beneath the surface. The mark isn't just a way to control people. It's a way to change them, to turn them into something they're not. A tool, a mindless servant of the system." Jaden's mind raced. Could it be true? Everything he had learned about the mark had pointed toward a form of control, but the idea that it could alter people's very essence, that was something darker, more dangerous than he had imagined. "Why haven't you come forward?" Pastor Caleb asked, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "If you're the resistance, why are you hiding?" The man's face grew hard. "Because the global system is not just watching the cities anymore. It has infiltrated every corner of the world. We've gone underground because it's the only place left to fight. But it's not enough. We need more. We need every willing soul to rise up and take back what has been stolen." Jaden felt his pulse quicken. "What do you need us to do?" The man stepped closer, his eyes locking with Jaden's. "You've already done the hardest part. You've survived. Now you need to help us reach others. The northern hills are just the beginning. There are safe zones, hidden places where people still resist. But we need you to gather them, to unite them." Jaden's gaze flickered to Pastor Caleb, who nodded in silent agreement. "Where do we start?" Jaden asked. The resistance leader smiled, but this time it was a smile of hope. "Follow me. The fight is just beginning." Chapter 12. Uniting the Remnant. The man, whose name was revealed to be Elias, led them through the dense underbrush, moving swiftly but quietly. His steps seemed effortless, as if he had been living off the land for years. The further they ventured from the city, the more Jaden realized how much the world had changed. They had crossed into a region that looked untouched by the oppressive system they had fled. The air was cleaner here, the ground soft beneath their feet. It felt like they were stepping into a world that had been forgotten, a world that might still hold some remnants of what had been lost. "How many people are with you?" Pastor Caleb asked, his voice soft, as if not wanting to disturb the peace of the wilderness. Elias looked back, his face set. "We have several hundred, scattered across different hideouts, but we need more. The system is pushing forward, and if we don't unite soon, we'll be crushed. They paused near a cluster of small cabins, nestled along a stream. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the faint sound of children's laughter reached them. It was a scene that seemed impossible. People living their lives, unaffected by the growing storm on the horizon. But Elias didn't stop. He kept moving, leading them through the forest toward an even more hidden location. "We've set up bases in places like this," Elias explained as they walked. "Towns, villages, all isolated from the global surveillance grid. We've been using ancient methods of communication to send word of our existence, but it's a slow process." "How do you know where to find us?" Jaden asked, unable to hide his curiosity. "We have eyes everywhere," Elias answered. "Disguised as ordinary citizens, we blend in, just like you have. And we've been watching the movements of those who refuse the mark. Every action counts, every life lost." Jaden nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. They had only scratched the surface of the system's true reach. But the resistance was fighting back in the shadows, hiding where they could, resisting where they must. Finally, they arrived at their destination, a hidden compound tucked deep in the mountains. The large stone structure was built into the side of the mountain, camouflaged by trees and vines. It was unlike anything Jaden had ever seen. Fortified, yet still a home to those who had chosen to resist. As they entered, several people, both men and women, greeted them. Some wore the same glowing symbol on their arms, while others wore ordinary clothing. Their faces were worn, but full of determination. "These are our people," Elias said, his voice full of pride. "The remnant of the faithful. They are the ones who refused the mark, who chose to stand in defiance, no matter the cost." A tall woman with short black hair approached them. "Elias," she said with a nod, "we've received word from the southern outposts. There are more survivors, people hiding in the forest and the mountains. We need to prepare." Elias's eyes grew dark. "Prepare for what?" "The global security forces have escalated their search," the woman replied. "They've begun to build larger facilities in the outskirts. They're coming for us, Elias. They know we're here." Jaden felt his heart race. "How much time do we have?" "Not much," the woman said grimly. "We need to act now." Elias turned to the group, his gaze hardening. "This is it. We've been waiting for the right moment, but the time has come. We need to unite every last soul who is still free. And we need to fight back before they crush us completely." Jaden felt a fire stir within him. This was the moment. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were going to fight. They were going to take back what had been stolen. But how? The question hung in the air, unspoken. How could they stand against a system that controlled everything? How could they defeat an enemy that seemed unstoppable? Elias seemed to read his thoughts. "It starts with each of us, one act of defiance at a time. The system is strong, but it's not invincible. We've already seen cracks in their armor. We'll exploit them." Jaden looked at Pastor Caleb. "Where do we start?" Pastor Caleb took a deep breath. "We take what we have and turn it into a weapon. Hope, faith, and unity. We may not have the numbers yet, but we have each other, and we have the truth." Jaden felt something stir inside him, something powerful. The resistance wasn't just a ragtag group of survivors. They were a movement, and he was part of it now. "We'll fight with everything we have," Jaden said, his voice filled with resolve. Elias nodded. "Then let's begin." Chapter 13. The first strike. The night was thick with tension. The resistance compound, nestled in the heart of the mountains, hummed with a quiet urgency. People moved swiftly but silently through the shadows, gathering weapons, supplies, and preparing for the impossible. The gravity of the situation was clear to everyone. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about reclaiming freedom, about striking back against the system that sought to control every soul. Jaden stood at the center of a makeshift command room, his eyes scanning the crude maps spread across the table. Elias, Pastor Caleb, and several other resistance leaders were deep in discussion, planning their next move. "We know the GSF has fortified their base here." Elias pointed to a marked location on the map, a high-security facility on the outskirts of the city. "This is the first of many bases. We need to hit it hard and fast." Pastor Caleb, his face drawn with exhaustion, nodded. "The more we disrupt their supply lines, the better. It's not just about taking out their facilities. It's about showing them we can strike from anywhere." Jaden felt a surge of determination. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for everyone who had been marked, for everyone still resisting. The stakes were higher than ever. The GSF had to be stopped. "We'll need a diversion," Jaden said, his mind working quickly. "Something to pull their forces away from the facility. If we can infiltrate undetected, we'll have a shot." Elias turned to him, his eyes sharp. "Good idea. You're suggesting a decoy mission?" Jaden nodded. "Yes. We create chaos in another part of the city, draw their forces out. It'll give us a small window to infiltrate the facility and sabotage their communication and weapons systems." The room fell into a heavy silence as the resistance leaders absorbed the plan. Finally, Pastor Caleb spoke. "This is risky, but it might be our only chance. We can't afford to hesitate." Jaden glanced around the room, seeing the same fire in everyone's eyes. They were ready for this. They had no other choice. "Then it's settled," Elias said, his voice steely. "We move out at dawn." The next morning, the resistance gathered at the edge of the mountain range. The convoy of trucks and jeeps, camouflaged with branches and netting, was ready to move. Jaden stood beside Sarah, holding her baby once more, though this time, her face was a mask of determination. "You okay?" Jaden asked quietly, his voice filled with concern. Sarah nodded, though there was a trace of fear in her eyes. "We've come this far. I'm not turning back now." The group loaded into the vehicles, and as the convoy set off, Jaden's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. They were about to strike the first blow in what could be a long and dangerous war. The terrain changed as they approached the city outskirts, lush forests giving way to barren industrial zones. The once thriving urban center now lay in the shadow of the global security forces' control. Towering barricades, military checkpoints, and surveillance drones were everywhere. They reached the city's edge, where a small resistance team was already in place, ready to carry out the diversion. "Remember, we create as much noise as possible," Elias instructed, his voice cold and commanding. "The diversion will hit their power grid in the industrial district. That'll disable their communication for a few hours, long enough for us to slip in undetected." Jaden nodded. "And we hit them fast, no hesitation." The convoy split up, taking different routes to the target area. Jaden's group moved toward the facility, while the diversion team set the stage for chaos. It didn't take long before the first explosion rocked the city, sending shockwaves through the streets. The power grid had been sabotaged, and the city was plunged into darkness. Jaden's heart skipped a beat. It was time. The resistance moved quickly, slipping through the shadows. Their movements were calculated and precise, every step taken with the knowledge that if they were discovered, their mission would fail. The once bustling streets now lay eerily still, the only sounds being the distant hum of drones and the faint whine of security systems. They reached the gates of the GSF facility, a fortress of steel and concrete. The towering walls were lined with guard towers and armed soldiers. It was heavily fortified, but the diversion had worked. Most of the security personnel had been sent to respond to the chaos in the city. "Let's move," Elias whispered. Jaden, his heart racing, nodded. The team scaled the walls using climbing ropes and entered through a small breach in the facility's exterior. The interior was as cold and sterile as the outside. Metal walls, dim fluorescent lights, and the hum of machinery. The resistance team split into smaller groups, each with their own objective: disable the weapon systems, sabotage the communications, and plant explosives to destroy the base from within. Jaden and Sarah's group was tasked with disabling the facility's internal network, the backbone of the GSF's surveillance and control systems. As they crept through the facility's corridors, the tension was unbearable. Every shadow seemed like a threat, every corner a potential ambush. But they had to keep going. The future of their fight depended on this. They reached the central command room, and Jaden quickly set to work, bypassing the security systems to access the main control panel. Minutes felt like hours. The sound of distant footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Jaden's pulse quickened. "Hurry," Sarah urged, her voice a while wide with fear. With a final press of a button, the system went offline. The lights flickered and then died, plunging the facility into complete darkness. "We're done here," Jaden said, relief flooding through him. "Not yet." Elias's voice echoed over the comms. "Get out now. The GSF is closing in."
Thank you for watching. Kindly like, comment, and subscribe. Click on the notification bell so you can be alerted anytime a new video is uploaded. And please, don't forget, share and be a blessing to someone. God richly bless you. Shalom.